Hello, this is Peter Merrick. I've been hiding out in San Diego during most of this scam. There's no other word for it. However, I've just come back to my city of Toronto, the place of my origin, where it's very comfortable right now. However, we're all waiting to see the other shoe to drop. There's little whispers that things are happening. However, for most of us, it's not impacting us. One of the great conversations that I've had in the last year was with Laura Jane Bolton. I'm going to say your middle name because that's what's in your email, Laura. And I want to continue that conversation, but the focus today is what we've learned and also the great conversations we've had with people, because human beings learn from other human beings, whether that is watching a great podcast or listening to a great podcast, reading a book, that we have the ability as human beings, which I think makes us distinct, is to learn from other people, to buying time. And hopefully, through our own experiences, we'll be able to take those lessons, and if we're really listening, to apply them. So we're able to make wise decisions. Laura, thank you so much for being back on this call with me.
Yeah, it's good to chat with you again. It's been a little while.
Well, you were very active on social media. I think that's where I should just start. And you just decided that you were taking a break. Share what the motivation was.
Oh, it's no break. I'm never using social media ever again.
Explain the what went through your mind to make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So so for the last 3 years of you call it the scam, I've just started calling it the situation. It's it's been over 3 years now, which is hard to believe, since we started becoming, well, some of us started becoming aware of this great scam. And for those 3 years, I was incredibly active on social media. So in 2020, it was more Facebook, and I was extremely vocal from the very start. And then at the end of 2020, I stopped using Facebook because I just wasn't feeling the vibe. And I started going hard on Instagram. And I also had a private Telegram channel. So those were my two things that I was using in terms of social media platforms. And I was sharing a lot, although I would say the kind of thing that I was sharing changed over time. Initially, it was very much about what was going on. And I think that 2020 and 21 were the perfect time for that. But then I realized that that time had passed for me, and I wanted to focus more on helping the people who are actually awake. And that's really the work that I do. I only work with and serve people who are already awake to the agenda, and I'm not interested in anybody who isn't. And so that has been my focus. But then when I started using LinkedIn, which is where we connected last year, and I was only on LinkedIn for, I think, a total of 5 months. And in that time, I had 4 accounts because my first account got deleted, and then the second and the third, and then finally in December, I think it was, the 4th one got deleted, and I decided that I wasn't going to bother with a 5th. And I think on LinkedIn, I was sharing a little bit more of the truth stuff, primarily, like, not with the intention of waking people up, because I have zero interest in doing that, but more so that I could identify more people who were like me and connect, because for me, connection with like-minded, like-hearted people is critical, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I managed to do that. I've got a lot of great contacts, obviously yourself and many others. And when I got my 4th account deleted, I just decided just not to bother anymore. And that was the end of my LinkedIn journey, but I was still using Telegram and Instagram. And then in January, one day I just got a very deep felt sense that I didn't want to use social media anymore. I felt like it was, it has a very, for me now, it has a very parasitic energy, and it feels very just energetically off. It's not aligned with me anymore. I was noticing when I would go onto Instagram, for example, I would just not feel good. So for me, it's not really a mental process. It's not a sort of cognitive process that I've been through to make that decision. It's more of just a felt sense. And that's pretty much how I run my life. It's that deeper wisdom that's telling me, no, actually, this is not aligned with you anymore. And it just didn't feel like something I wanted to do. And so I, at the end of February, I stopped using Instagram and Telegram, and now I don't use any social media whatsoever.
Well, you're a little ahead of the curve with me. I stopped really posting. However, I'm still on LinkedIn because I still have to pay my bills. And I realized when they put me in a timeout, I realized I hadn't collected all my contacts. And I realized, like, at first I said, I don't need them. And I was off for like 2 months. Then I realized we have to actually deal with two worlds, right? Like, because however we want to get out of the system, I still need to eat. You still need to eat. We still need to breathe. Like, this can't, unfortunately, we're born into that system where we can remove ourselves somewhat. We could be objective in seeing how things are playing out. At the same time, the vast majority of the world is still built into that system.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to actually change people. I really agree with you that when I spoke out on LinkedIn, and I, at one point in May, there was 1 week I got 2.2 million views, and I chalked that up to everybody's boring. So I was actually just saying a truth, like there's a dead elephant in the room and everyone's walking around it. And I was just pointing it out. So I was getting a lot of people viewing my stuff. I was like in shock. And then they throttled me. And then when I came back from Panama, I was in Panama for a month, they took me off. And it was very liberating. The badge of ability that I have is when people in my old world hear that I was taken off of LinkedIn, they say, oh, you're the first person I ever know who was ever taken off. You know, it's you know, and however they chalk it up that I was always a little different. So, you know, I'm able to walk around it because.
So was your account deleted, or you were just kind of put on a you know, timeout?
I was put on a timeout, and then they told me, this person who contacted me told me that I was permanently out. And then I reached out to LinkedIn and I just asked them if they put me back on. And they said to me, if you behave yourself, we'll let you back on. And I guess I acquiesced because my attitude is now this: if someone's not awake, it's not my job to awaken someone. I'll share with you a story that for me, I use to explain why I'm not going to blow people's models of the world if they're not prepared for it. I knew someone who was raising a daughter whose wife had been raped during the Second World War, and she thought that this man was her father. Well, the story was the mother was married before and he died. The real story is she was probably raped. And everybody knew that she was not this man's child. Now, it's not my place or anybody to blow this person, he's long gone, to blow this person's model of the world. That would make me cruel. That would make anybody who would do that cruel. However, if someone is interested to going through that process, I'll just ask questions, and there'll be pointed questions. And then if they ask more, I can direct them. However, I realize that there's a lot of people who need to have their model of the world. And I was going through such a big change, frustration, anger, where I just had to yell to the world. And I met a lot of great people, such as yourself. There are a lot of people who were threatened by me asking those questions personally, because if they went down that road, perhaps they weren't mentally, emotionally, and spiritually at that moment capable of actually having that rush of information. Because I can only speak for myself, and I'm going to turn it to you. When I first started going down all those rabbit holes that I was scared to go down, I was very depressed, realizing that the world was not what I had thought it to be.
Yep.
And it would be cruel for me. I was ready for it. I had a lifetime of preparing for it, and it was still overwhelming. To do that to someone who's not prepared, who has not prepared themselves, would be cruel. And one of the things I've learned is the world out there is what's in here. And when I'm nice to people, I'll be honest, it's selfish, because I don't want to feel bad.
Yep.
Because I realize that you're just a projection. I'm looking at you and I say, you're a beautiful woman, you got a great accent, but I will never know who you are. You're a projection of what I perceive. It's based on the model of the world I'm using right now. And it will hopefully evolve.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I've been through a shift with, with regards to that and the need to wake other people up. I think in 2020, I was just so activated to share what was going on, which I did do mostly online. And I think when you do that, what you're doing is you're putting something out there which people can receive or not. So you're not trying to force anybody. You're not badgering anybody personally. You are just putting it out. And many people who came across what I was sharing were ready to receive that, and they were thankful for that. And there were others who, would angrily message me and say, I'm unfollowing you and all these things. Okay, that's great. That's fine. But I did feel a sense of necessity to share what I knew. And originally my intention was, I've got to wake people up. And how that evolved for me was it shifted from needing to wake other people up to not needing to wake them up at all, and just focusing on what do I want to express. And there's a very big difference. So if you're sharing something because you feel called to express it, it's something it's something you feel passionate about, and you want to authentically express that, that is your right to do so. And I think it's important that we do, because when we have things we want to express and we censor ourselves, that is not good for us. It has implications. But if you're doing it because you feel a need to make others see, that's different. And so that's the shift that I made. I went from needing people to wake up and having this urgency around it to actually just authentically sharing. And to be honest, not giving a shit how people received it. So it didn't matter whether people, woke up or not. I don't care. And now I'm genuinely not interested. I don't share anything about the truth, because 3 years in, if you do not know that the last 3 years has been one big scam, you are probably never going to. And it doesn't matter to me how many people are awake. It's completely irrelevant to my life. And when your happiness and your well-being is not dictated by things outside of you, that's when you're free. That's true freedom. And most people who spout freedom and I've escaped the matrix and all of that stuff that we say, most people are not free because they are actually stuck in the matrix of their own internal issues. And that is why the inner work is so important. And that's what, you know, I help people to do. You are not free until you have inner freedom, and needing to wake other people up in order for you to feel okay is a sign of something deeper within you that needs to be addressed. And that's how I see it.
I just want to share with you a shift that happened. And again, the shift happens inside in here, not out there. I'm back in Toronto right now, and many people chose to participate actively. Some people in my family really actively participated, like this many times.
Yeah.
And my thought is, I'm just going to enjoy these people. I'm not going to try to disrupt them. And what came out of that for me was a real growth. And for most of my life, I was looking out there for validation for what was in here.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought about it, I realized that I had not been present to my life. I either was focusing on things that had happened or focusing on the life ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I was missing was being where I was. The example that I would use now, all that's real in my perception should be you, is you, and our conversation. Not thinking about what happened just before and what's going to happen in the future. And I remember once being told by my father, he had several things he shared. One of them I don't really follow very well. I should, because it sounded pretty wise. The first one is, be careful of what you say, because once it's out there, it can't be taken back. So that's something that I'm working on. The
Mm-hmm.
second one is, don't have any expectations of anybody, because you'll never set yourself up for disappointment and only open yourself up to be pleasantly surprised. And that can only happen when I'm in the moment, where I walk into a place and I have no expectations, except I believe that the universe, God, whatever someone wants to call the things that we're not able to be aware of, that the right thing that I need will present itself only if I'm open to it.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest lesson I've taken. And I'm thankful for this scamdemic, because I don't believe that I would have come to it as early as I did, because I would have been stuck in my old life. And this has given us a huge opportunity to step back and really evaluate. And again, like when you talk about how you were giving your message out and you were telling people, I think there's like, I can't remember what the 5 stages of grief are. I literally went through the 5 levels of grief, where now I just have acceptance of the situation.
Yep.
And you know, I had to step back from it to actually realize that I was really going through grief. I was everything that I like to believe.
Yeah.
The ground had moved. The one part that I get pulled back, I get sucked back in, is I'm back in Toronto, and so many people here are thinking it's going to go back to the way it was. And they're doing the same things they did before, but the utility they're receiving is declining, diminishing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. Most people will go back because that's human nature. People tend to be complacent unless there is an urgent thing pushing them not to be. There are not that many of us who take action and stay aware when there's not an imminent threat. And that's just human nature. Even
Yes.
people who are aware of the scam, a lot of them are complacent. And, you know, one of the things that I've really noticed is that there are so many of us who are aware, who are almost in a holding pattern. It's like just kind of waiting and not actually taking their, you know, really reclaiming their power and focusing on creating the life that they want. They're still focused on what's going on out there or
Yes.
what might happen in the future, but they're not focusing their energy on themselves and their own lives. And again, this is the same as the needing people to wake up. It's like, why do you need external things to be a certain way for you to create the life that you want? Well, you don't, because I'm creating the life that I want, and I don't give a shit what's happening out there. I really don't. I like they can do what they're going to do what they're going to do. So you either comply with it or you don't comply with it. You either focus your energies on stressing about what's going on, or you focus your energies on creating what you want. You always have a choice. There's always a choice. Not doing anything is a choice. You know, we all have the ability to reclaim our power and create what we want. And there are many people who are still in a victim consciousness. And you know that you're in a victim consciousness when you are saying things like, I can't, I have to, and I have no choice. If you're saying those, if you find yourself saying any of those three things, you are in a victim consciousness. And that isn't going to help you to create what you want. You can't control anything beyond your own inner world and your own actions. That's all you can control. So if you are focusing on things beyond that, then you're going to continue to be disappointed. And it goes back to what you're saying about expectations, right? People have this expectation, like, this needs to happen. In order for me to be okay, this needs to happen. Well, you don't have control over all of that stuff that happens. So what are you going to do? And I think that is the position that many people find themselves in. I think there is a choice point now where we have these two trajectories of people within the awake community. I'm not talking about the people that are asleep. Let them sleep, leave them be. It's not our place to, as you said, it's not our place to traumatize them. But the people who are aware, there are only two trajectories now. One is getting stuck in the darkness and the drama and the doom and the gloom and the worry and the paralysis. And the other is to just say, fuck it, and focus on creating what you want, focus on what's good, focus on building community with other people like you, and just getting on with it. There are only two trajectories now, and I'm seeing people very clearly going down one or the other. And again, that's their path. It's not for me to try and force any of those people down a different path either. You know, everyone is on their own journey and going down their own path.
For me, the greatest scene in a movie that illustrates for being done is Forrest Gump. When Forrest Gump runs across America 3 times, he's got all these people following, thinking he's a guru, and he says, I'm done. I'm done. Whatever he had to work out, he just was done, and he went home to live his life. And I think about that, I attach myself to that because that's how I feel. I
Mm.
went through all this great learning. We could all write books about all the things that we discovered and, all these conspiracies. And I realized it's just a conjecture. I don't know. I can only verify what's in front of me, what I can touch with my senses, and hopefully I'm introspective enough to do conjectures. I just want to share with you just two things I fell upon in my walking through the forest, trying to figure things out. I agree with you about there's certain people who are awake, who are like deer in a headlight, where they're just not moving now. Because there's several types of people or that I perceive that people fallen into. One, there's people who just complied. They never question. They believe big government, big business, everyone there. Someone is making sure that things are being watched. The second group happens to be the ones who know that there's something wrong, but they still complied. And then there were the third group, which would not comply. The problem with the people in the third group, which I would say those are the people who awoke into something's not right, and something in them had them not comply, is now, are they going to take action? Are they going to now just become completely complacent and go in a corner and just die? And I remember being told that the best way to get revenge is to live a good life, not to focus on anybody else.
Yep.
The other thing that I've learned, that I've been working on articulating, is that how did these people wake up? And it comes back and it leads to intuition. And the first one is I've identified that somewhere in our influences, there was an outlier. Someone who worked within the system wasn't part of the system. So on a conscious or a subconscious level, we were told that you could question, because a lot of people I've met, they didn't have that. So it's very scary when you try to take up, let's say, piano at the end of your life, than if you have that influence early on in your life. Number two, for some reason, because of that, they fell outside the indoctrination. We can probably identify, we really start thinking those who decided that they were not going to comply, those influences in our life, a mother, a father, an uncle, a teacher, someone. Somehow they fell outside the indoctrination. They always saw things a little different than everyone else. They could be social, but they were lone wolves. They needed the social, but they needed their own time to do introspection. So introspection is key. And that leads to the third part. Do I trust my intuition? After you and I spoke, I had the pleasure to speak with Patrick Moore, and he was a co-founder of Greenpeace.
Mm-hmm.
And he believes carbon is good. That's one of the reasons I got banned for my interview with Patrick. He likes nuclear. And his story is really interesting. And I want to share with you what I got from our conversation and why I spoke to him. He was the only one in Greenpeace who had ever lived in nature. He called the rest of us truckitarians, saying that if things were not brought on a truck, we would starve. We'd be nude and we'd have no food and shelter. Number two, he was the only one with a PhD in environmental studies. So everybody else who was in Greenpeace when he started, they had all come from the city. And they were not scientists. So he became the outcast because he came out and said, carbon's good. You and I produce 40,000, whatever it is, per million of carbon with every breath. So in essence, that equation that Bill Gates showed, he's talking about you and I, basically, and that's eugenics, because the environmental movement is eugenics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, When I spoke to Patrick, I asked him a question. To Patrick, how did you know I wasn't a shill? Because I could be a shill. And what he shared with me was so revealing. He said he's learned to rely on his intuition. And he asked questions to follow up to confirm his intuition.
Mhm.
However, his intuition was the most important thing. And number two, he had a very strong family support system. You need a support system when you're going through a transformation.
Yeah.
And just to close off before I'd like you to riff on what I'm sharing, it's trusting our intuition, how we feel, not going and choosing to go like because it's logical to go left, to go right. And he said every time he followed his intuition, good things happen. Every time he went against it, that's when things fell apart.
Yeah. Yeah. I can build on that. I think so. The whole trusting intuition thing is interesting to me, and I have a slightly different perspective on it. I agree that trusting our intuition is incredibly important, and it is how I live my life. However, there is a difference between feeling and knowing. So a lot of people think is their intuition is actually a dysregulated nervous system. So this is why I say to people, don't trust your feelings, trust your knowing, because they are different. Feelings come from within the body and are very, very related to the state of our nervous system. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes we will say that maybe we don't trust somebody, right? That could be genuinely coming from our deep inner wisdom, which to me is what intuition is. It's more about the heart. It's like that deep sense of wisdom within. But you can only access that if you're connected to it and you don't have a dysregulated nervous system getting in the way. Because sometimes we will trust someone that actually we shouldn't trust, but we trust them because it's what's familiar to our nervous system, not what's good for our nervous system. So this is why a lot of people are, say, for example, people engage in abusive relationships. Because to their nervous system, if they've experienced a lot of like drama, chaos, abuse in earlier life or throughout their life, and their nervous system is dysregulated and isn't healthy, then their nervous system is going to interpret chaos, drama, stress as safe because it's familiar. And that's how the nervous system works. It doesn't do what's best for us. It does what feels familiar, because familiarity is safety. So if we're used to drama and stress and chaos, we will often unconsciously seek that out. And this is how people get into abusive relationships. It's called trauma bonding, because the trauma you've experienced has created a certain state in your nervous system and in your brain. So it's neurological and nervous system, and it seeks out what is familiar, even if it's not what's best for you, and even if it doesn't necessarily even feel that great. And then people wonder, why do I keep repeating these patterns? Why do I keep attracting these kinds of people? Why do I keep finding myself in these situations? It's because your subconscious, which is in every cell of your body, is there to keep you safe. And familiarity is what the body interprets as safe. And so this is why getting a healthy, regulated nervous system, in addition to connecting more deeply with your heart and soul and your inner wisdom, those two things together are incredibly important. And when you do that, you then know the difference, and you're able to kind of connect with that inner knowing from a more balanced, stable place. And that's why I call it the heart's wisdom. It's like I follow my heart's wisdom, because just feelings, sometimes, for example, we can feel anxious about something or not feel good about something, but that might just be because we're so conditioned the other way. And we're seeing what our body is feeling is, this is not familiar. I don't feel safe. And so we back away from things. So this is actually what stops a lot of people from pursuing their dreams and from doing and from making changes. You know, I hear it every single day. I really want to move. I really want to leave my job. I really want to do this. I want to leave my relationship. It's been awful for 20 years, but I just can't. And it's because they are so wired for what they know that anything outside of what the body knows is considered a danger. And therefore people don't take that leap because it just feels too scary and it feels too dangerous. Well, that's not actually in service to your highest good, but it makes sense because the purpose of your nervous system and your subconscious is to keep you safe. So this is why most people stay in safety, even if they hate it. People will stay in jobs they can't stand rather than take the leap to go and do something that they actually love. And this is the root of most people's problems.
And that requires a lot of introspection for an individual to sit back and ask themselves questions. There was a book I read maybe like 20 years ago. It was called Power versus Force by
Yes.
David Dawkins.
Yes.
And I would recommend that for anyone, because I read that book 20 years ago, but during COVID, I repurchased it and I reread it maybe 3 or 4 times because the message is really simple. We have, if we spend the time working on ourselves, we have access to our entire lives and to other lives and to whatever in the noonosphere. And we can go and ask a yes or no question, and that will be most likely the answer. And we can go through, cut through all the logic and everything else, and we can just go and find the answer. And it really comes down to vibrating. How are we vibrating? Are we vibrating and trying to find something more positive? Or do we get sucked down on a lower vibration? And in essence, we're all vibrations. I just want to share with you why introspection is so powerful. And this is, you know, we each have moments in our lives where we learn a lot about ourselves. So when I was at university, or you guys called it uni, right? Is that what they call it? So when I was at university, I went to the second largest university in Canada, and I was active in student politics. And you had to, for the student elections, I was running for a position as the vice president, and you had to hand in the nomination form with about 150 signatures at 4 o'clock. I finished at 12 noon. I went up to the library and I just sat there. And I was prepared not to hand it in. And I asked myself a question, the deeper self or whatever asked, what are you so scared of? And I said to myself, I'm scared of putting myself out there and being rejected. Mm-hmm. And why I share that incident is because now when I'm very frightened of something, I ask myself, if I'm scared of it for real reasons, like, you know, I'm on the 16th floor of a building right now, I'm not going to crawl out the window. However, there's other things in my life that I have fear, and I ask myself, are you scared because you really want it and you're frightened that you're going to fail? Mm-hmm. And when I answer the question, it's because I really want it and I'm frightened I'm going to fail, then I know it's authentic for me to take a step forward. However, if I hadn't had that experience younger, I wouldn't have ever known that that's how Peter Merrick functions, because it's other people have different experiences and have different ways. The root would be the same, but how they experience and interpret it is different, but we all arrive at the same place.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that on the rejection piece, it's the fear, whether it's conscious or unconscious, whether it's in our subconscious, whether it's conscious or not, rejection, not belonging, is actually, the fear of that is actually the greatest fear that humans have. And it links to something I talk about quite a lot, which is when we are babies, we have two fundamental needs beyond the need for food and water. The two needs we have as we're growing up, one is to be able to be ourselves, which is the authenticity piece, our true selves, express ourselves, be who we are, do what what's coming naturally to us. And the other is the need for attachment, which is belonging and connection, being part of the tribe. And that is, there is an ancestral reason for that. We are pack animals, we're not solitary creatures. And so there is a very good reason for that. And the challenge is that most of us, when we are children, we are not fully accepted as how we are. So we will be told, do this, don't do this. We'll be praised for certain things. We'll be told, not to cause a fuss. We're told to deny our feelings. Don't cry. Don't do this. Don't do that. There's various different forms of trauma that we experience as children. Just not being accepted for who we are in some, way that our parents don't know that it's trauma that they're creating. But anything that is stopping us from being loved, like feeling like we can be ourselves and be loved, so having that love and connection, that is an experience of trauma, the trauma that's happening within the body. And so when that happens, the way we interpret that is, if I am truly myself and I'm authentic, I will not be loved. I am not enough as I am. And that is most people's core wound, because everyone experiences this as children, because most people's parents are not highly conscious parents. And so we internalize it as children. And this is why a great many people are people pleasers. People don't like conflict. They don't like disagreeing with others. They do things to be popular. They will say what they need to say to be accepted. So there's a very good reason why it happens, as I've just explained. And we can, in terms of overcoming that, I think, to your point, using the conscious mind is important. It's an important part of it. But if you have unhealed trauma, the conscious mind alone cannot heal that. You need to actually address the trauma where it lives, which is in the body. And so this is why, when I work with people, we address the psychological, we address the somatic, which is within the body, particularly the nervous system, and also the more deeper connection to the heart, to the soul, to our true essence, to source, all of that kind of deeper, more spiritual stuff. you need those three elements if you're really going to heal and create, you know, sustainable change. That is really the way forward as I see it, you know, in my experience.
And that's important. I showed up at a meeting last week that I was just going to hear a lecture, because there were two RNs that were going to speak about some of the things that have been happening that they've noticed before their licenses were taken. And they were not able to come into Toronto. And I just showed up, and I was asked to speak for an hour and a half from my observations. And I was just there in the moment. It's just, you know, being in the moment and just having working on taking the attitude. And again, it's a habit, that something that's supposed to present itself will present itself to me, and to be in the moment. And I had a great time. I like to think they had a great time. And it just happened. And in my life, when I think about it, when you just go with your rhythm, you figure out what your rhythm is, the universe is going to show up. I don't know if you've had a chance to read any of Buckman or Fuller's works.
I haven't
His
read
last
full
book,
works. I mean, I've seen, you know, quotes and wisdom from, you know, from Bucky, but
he wrote a book at the end of his life, which was a gift to me, because it was a solitary exploration and explanation of how he turned an ordinary life into an extraordinary life. And he wrote it at the end of his life, which made it so powerful, because here was someone who had gone bankrupt, who had lost a child, and at 32, he thought his life was over, and he said, I'm just going to go and make my life an experiment. And here's, at the end of his life, someone who had over 200 patents that they're impacting us still today. And he said that if his goals were authentic and big and inclusive, wonderful things happened in his life. And when they became small and focused and poor little him, his life mirrored exactly the way he thought. He also shared something else that intellectually I wanted to believe. Now, after experience, I know it to be true. He pointed out, he said, 1 in 10 million people understand this. When what you aim to do is truly authentic to you and is in harmony with your environment, nature, however, whatever word that someone wants to use, you take one step forward, the universe will take 99 steps towards you. And it's a trust that the universe, and it's having that knowing that the universe will come towards you. Because everything else, and as I mentioned earlier before, I project onto the world what's in here. So I'm projecting onto you who I need you to be in my perception of the world, and vice versa. I will never know who you truly are, and you will never know who I'm truly. If I had a superpower, it would be to go into someone's head and to see their cognitive map of the world. I'm really curious, and that's why I ask people questions. However, I will never, ever know someone.
yeah.
And I also realized that in the past, and I fall back on the sword quite often, is I need to believe certain people are certain ways, and it's really two-dimensional because people change. And by denying another person's ability to change, it's a projectionism. I am denying myself the ability to change, because whatever I put out into the world and I perceive about the world out there, I'm really telling you, I'm telling myself, but my world. So just one last thing I want to share is I listen to a 12-hour audiobook with Kathy O'Brien.
Yep.
And she is incredible. Her and a few other people brought me down some rabbit holes that I didn't want to believe. And she shared that, and something which I stumbled upon myself. I love writing. It's the way I connect to my soul, to God. And she was sharing that through writing, taking the things that are happening internally and put it out in a slower vibration. Because when we write something, we're taking a fast vibration, a thought, and we're slowing it down. And objectively, and this is what I find through the editing, the writing is one thing, but the editing is really the beautiful part. You're able to reorganize it and put it back into your head. And that changes your whole prism, or it has the possibility to change the world. And what I've implemented recently for myself, I had a situation here in Toronto that I got sucked back into terrible anchors, which had to do with my family of origin. And I wrote something that could have been very hurtful for someone. I looked at it and I said, I don't want that vibration for me, because it's going to just boomerang to me. But what came out of it is I said, I'm now going to write a happy journal. And what I mean by that is whatever happens to me, I'm going to look for the positive learning, because that comes down to the habit. Do I have the habit? And I believe that the way I'm interpreting what you shared, we have sort of like certain behaviors, that comfort zones and things like that. To change that is to break the habit. So for the last 3 weeks, anything that happens, even the most mundane thing, I'm going, well, I have been, to switch it up to what's the positive thing, because I believe that that will change my outlook, and that will open me up to possibilities, because I was too stuck looking behind and looking forward and never really stopping and saying, what is now? And I can put it to bed too, because once I write it out, I'm done with it. And it's unconscious at that point. And then later on, hopefully, when that moment happens, do I turn left or right? Because I spent that time, I'll be able to trust my intuition and make the right decision that will enhance my life. And let's be honest, maybe save it, because we know that the world is not what you and I were told it was, which is liberating.
It is. And I to your point about, presence, I think presence is incredibly important. And again, it's something that most people struggle with, because we are always thinking about what happened in the past, or planning and thinking or worrying about the future. And so that learning to be more present is something that is important, but it can take time, because we're so conditioned not to be. And so that is definitely a learned, honed habit. I think with the, what you're saying about the always looking for the positive in everything. I largely agree with that, but also I've very recently had a bit of a shift around how I see that. I feel like, particularly in the kind of personal development, self-help world, it's very much about, don't look at the downside, don't look at the negative, always switch to what's positive. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I'm not saying that. But sometimes stuff is just shit. Sometimes there isn't a positive. It's like, oh, I'm being abused by my partner. Oh, let me think of the positive. It's like sometimes you just, and I think actually all the time, whenever you don't feel good, or you're in a shitty situation, you're feeling down, you're feeling angry, whatever, the most important thing you can do is feel your feelings and honor it and allow it to be what it is. Once you've done that, once you've processed that energy and allowed it to move and allowed it to dissipate, and there's various ways you can do that depending on what you're feeling. Again, this links back to the somatic nervous system work. Once you've done that, then you can start to look at what can I learn from this? What's the positive? How do I move forward rather than getting stuck? And this is the balance, because many people get stuck in just feeling their feelings. It's like, I feel down, I feel miserable, and they wallow, right? And they just stay in it and stay in it. And then there are other people who are basically spiritually bypassing, who don't want to feel the uncomfortable things, or they've been conditioned in the personal development, health, self-help world to always see the positive. And so they will not allow themselves to experience the grief, the anger, the whatever it is that they're experiencing. And they will immediately just go, oh, I'm going to look at, like, what's the positive? What can I learn? And they will suppress those emotions. And that is really, really dangerous. And so I think it's important to do both.
I fully agree with you, Laura. I skipped a bunch of steps. Like these journal entries, some of them are long. So they're focusing on wallowing.
Yeah.
You know,
and journaling can really help with that.
And at the same time, feeling that negative energy. And then at that point, there's a time, and it's just, I just know when it's time to say, flip it.
Yes.
So I used that example of Forrest Gump, where he's running across America. And then he just says after, and he took him 3 times to run across America to finally say, I'm done now. I'm going to do something different. Like, that's done. And to honor that we need a process. One of the things I also realized is when I was younger, I said, I wish I got this when I was younger. I wish I knew this when I was younger. And once I asked a great question, and once I was asked a great question, and the reason why they were great questions wasn't because of the person asking it, wasn't me or the person that, it was the answer that it elicited. And one question that I asked is, I knew 2 individuals who were at 52, both of them made choices in their lives. They chose to end their marriages because the kids were grown up. And one of the gentlemen I knew, great guy, very close to me, he passed away during COVID, not because of the jab, because he had cancer. And I just want to emphasize, one of the reasons I woke up is I couldn't come back to Canada to go to see him, nor could I go to his funeral. So he said to me that he would pay $1 trillion to go back in time and change his life. He'd give all the money in the world for it. You know, and it's like he was looking backwards, and there was a sadness that he held. You know, it's sort of like a big regret. Another gentleman who had also decided to change his life at 52, I asked him if he'd wished he had left early and made changes in his life. And the answer he gave me was the most incredible answer, and also I was ready to listen to it. He said, no, I don't think about it. And I said, what do you mean? Just imagine what your life could have been. He says, no, when I was ready, I left. And before then, I wasn't ready. And I'm going, oh my God, that makes perfect sense. When I wake up, that's when I was made to wake up. When I'm willing to stop feeling sorry for myself, that's when I'm ready. And then until then, I'm not. And then I apply that to other people. I give them the dignity at the same time that they have to be where they need to be. So that was my great question, but it was the great answer that I elicited. I was asked a question by a good friend of mine who's, you know, he's jumped on a new track, which I'm completely impressed with. He started a speaking bureau for awakened people, and he did me a favor. He sent me off as his rep to a Reawaken tour, and I recruited his first 6 people. You know, it gave me purpose because I was definitely a boat without a rudder at that point. So I just like pushed myself right into the media room and introduced myself, and you know, I was helping him start. He asked me a question, and because he asked me that question, I have a great attachment towards him because I see him as being a very bright, wise person who's on the journey, or on a journey that I'd like to be on. And his question was, what was your wake up moment? And I thought about it, and it took me a while to think about it. And there was a moment during COVID, I got hit on my electric scooter, and I did pot first time in 20 years, thinking it put me to sleep. Not good. You got anxiety, don't take anything. It could have been shrooms, heroin, ayahuasca, whatever. But I saw my life from 10,000 feet. And I saw the narrative, and I saw how it could be manipulated, whatever. And at that particular moment, it changed my perception just a little bit, a little out of whack where it didn't fit. And I identified it, well, it was that particular moment. And then I thought about it, and I said, but there was a moment before that, and a more moment before that. And I kept it going back and then I learned something about life, and I look at life as being school, where it's a learning experience. And I look at it that you and I, when we're born, we're sleepy. We don't know the world. We have the potential to wake up a little more with every experience. Mm-hmm. And that's why at the same time, of all the stuff that's happened, and the shock and the grieving and realizing that my whole perception was not exactly a healthy perception for me, because other people are happy with the perceptions that I had. However, I got an opportunity to wake up, because if this didn't happen, I would have gone through an entire life asleep. And it doesn't matter what happens. I can go and be shot tomorrow, have a heart attack, whatever. I at least got a glimpse of how I participate in this universe, which really, for each of us, it's our consciousness, the way that we interpret it. That's the universe. When we're born, some people might have access to past lives. I didn't. And when it ends, I don't know what happens after that. All I learned about is all I have is my senses and my experiences, and hopefully the ability to do enough introspection so I'm able to trust my knowing and take action. And that was, so what was your wake up moment? Well, let's scrap that. You advise executives, entrepreneurs, people who have woken up. I'm a voyeur. I love asking people questions because it helps fill in my model of the world. Can you share some experiences with people that you've worked with, you've guided? What title would you use for yourself, Laura?
Well, I don't really like titles, because everyone interprets it differently. I mean, in terms of what I do, really, I would say there's some things I teach, and there's some things that it's more about coaching and guiding. So I don't ever tell people what they should do. I help them to figure out what is right for them. And at the core of everything I do, it's really about being in our full power, which is being in our authenticity. Authenticity is the most powerful vibration. And ultimately, when we can learn to be more of our authentic selves, we are able to really be in our power. And so that is kind of the core of what I do. And in terms of just on your point about awakening, for me, awakening is a lifelong process. There is no such thing as being asleep and then being awake. You're somewhere on the spectrum. Yes. And it's never ending. And there's different elements to being awake. Some people say, I'm really awake, but they're just referring to knowing what's going on out there in terms of all the agendas and the scams and stuff, but they're not awake to themselves. And then there's other people who are a bit more awake to themselves, but maybe they haven't really looked into the outer stuff. So I think it's a kind of continuum, but there's also different types of awakening. And ultimately, to your point that you made earlier, everyone's reality is different. So people say, oh, this is reality, or that's reality. What they really mean is, this is my reality. So there are literally 8 billion, almost, whatever. I don't know how many people there are in the world now, but let's say 8 billion. There are 8 billion different realities in this world. And our reality is created, as you know, through our internal filtration system. And that is our mind. It's all of our life experiences. It's our traumas. It's the state of our nervous system. It's how deeply we're connected to ourselves. It's all of those things. So our reality, when we talk about truth, actually, we're usually talking about just our truth. It's like, this is what feels true for me. And that's all you can go on. What feels right for you? What feels true to you? It isn't right, wrong, good, bad, black, white. Everyone's reality is different, but what's important is that you're connected to your true self, and that you're able to have agency over your life, and you're able to be your own authority, and not living a life that others expect of you, or not, trying to censor yourself. Or if you're not showing up fully, authentically, then as I said earlier, you're not free. So it's really, everything I do is to help people to reclaim that inner power through authenticity, and to show up in the world in that way and create the life that they want, so that they don't end life with regrets, because most people end their life full of regrets and always wondering, oh, if I could have done this, oh, I wish I'd done that. That is not how I want to exit this planet. I want to be able to say, I was myself and I fully experienced life. That's what I think we're here to do. I don't even think we're here to learn. I think we are literally here to experience life fully, everything that life has to offer. And we experience it fully by fully being ourselves, and by showing up in the world from that place, and not being held back by our fears and our blocks and all of these different things. We fully experience life, and by fully experiencing life, we naturally learn, we naturally evolve, we naturally grow, and then we can come to the end of our life and say, do you know what, I really lived. And I think deep down, that's what people really want. I think there's a quote, I think it's Joseph Campbell, but and I can't remember exactly the wording, but it's something around, people often talk about, really wanting purpose and meaning in their life. But actually what people are really looking for is just to feel alive. And I really believe that. And so my goal in life is literally just to fully experience life, and to be as much of myself as I can, and to be express that in whichever form as powerfully as I can. And if I do that, then I've had a pretty good life without regrets. And that's kind of my philosophy nowadays on life. It's like, just live.
You made me think of the story of Dr. Paul Erdos. He was a mathematician, and in the United States, he basically lived out of a suitcase. And he is the most published mathematician in history. But the way he lived his life was this. He lived out of a suitcase. He would go to other top mathematicians. The rules were, you put him up and you buy him a ticket to his next location. And he would show up and say, my mind is yours. What problem do you want to solve? Let's do math. And that's what he did. He owned nothing, and in the math community, they have something called Udu's number, because it's like, how many separation are you from someone who actually wrote a paper with me? Because he also collaborated with more people in any profession. And for me, that's such an attractive life, because he'd show up and say, he loved math. And he was also serving. And as soon as they solved the problem, he'd be put on a train or a bus with his little suitcase and he'd go off somewhere else. And he loved what he did. And he, at the same time, the way I interpret that story, and I expressed it when I had an opportunity to speak last week, was the most important life is your life to you. And we've been given a ticket. It's like going to an amusement park. I get a ticket, you get a ticket. You want to sit and complain about what's happening? Fine. Closes at 10 o'clock. I got a ticket. I want to go and experience as much as possible. However, at the same time, I'm not going to be upset if I can't go on a ride. Maybe I sit on a bench and I talk to someone and they share with me through the conversation something that enhances my life. And I'm just going to be open to it and conscious that the park closes at 10 o'clock. Because what I've learned through this, and I have a knowing now by listening to people, the reason most people fell for the scam is they were scared of death. And that's because they never allowed themselves to live. And that to me is they never allowed themselves to enjoy the moment, to be in the moment, and knowing that their lives are no greater than anyone else. And the other thing that I've learned, and I know, is narration. It's easy for me to go and write a story and say how glorious your life is, Laura, how wonderful your life is, and how you've got your stuff together and you have a special red phone right to God. And many people say, oh, I wish I was her, I wish I had that. And they're stealing from themselves, because as soon as I project to say, oh, that person's life, I wish I had that. Or also envy, where I actually, say, oh, that person must have robbed from someone, did this and that. I'm stealing from the most important person. And that would be me. And that's from other people as well. They're looking outside for validation. And that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
So I'd like to go back to the work that you do. Are there any conversations that stick out that help you see the world a little bigger that you'd like to share?
There's nothing. I'm not going to share specific conversations that I've had with certain clients, but what I will say is that every person I work with, every interaction I have with anybody, regardless of whether I'm working with them or not, is always giving me insights. It's always teaching me something. That's life, that's why I love having conversations. That's why I, love listening to things and reading things. Like, it's all in some way, it's all that experience. I'm always taking something away from it. And the more I work with people, over the years, the more I learn about human behavior and human psychology and human trauma, and I see patterns. And there are, whilst we are all very, very different, we are all also very similar in terms of, how our psychology works, the effect that trauma has on us, and, the behaviors that humans display are actually the same, regardless of whether you're awake or not. It's still the same behaviors that I'm seeing, because I only work with awake people, in terms of they know about the outer stuff and they're on more of an inner awakening journey. It's the same stuff. It's the same patterns. It's the same blocks. The context might be slightly different, but it's always the same. And the more time goes on, the more I just see more clearly what those fundamental things are. And then that helps me to do what I do even more effectively, because I'm gaining that, I'm constantly gaining that wisdom and also getting different perspectives, because sometimes, you know, I think it's important not to think that we know everything. It's like, yeah, I know a lot about a lot of things, but I also don't know very much. You know, there's always so much more to know, and there's different ways you can see things, and there's maybe questions that someone asks you that they haven't asked, you know, you haven't been asked before. And so that's why I love working with people, and I love having conversations, because it's through those interactions that you learn about yourself, you learn about others, you expand your perspectives, you gain more wisdom. And that is just what I love to do. That is the beauty of life, as I said before, just to experience it, you know, to be present, to experience it, to feel alive. That is what's important. And so yeah, I'm always learning, and yeah, it's been fascinating for me, especially over the last couple of years, to start to see, you know, the real core issues that most humans have, and we're just all so similar in, you know, in that respect.
Self-love, self-accepting, purpose. Laura, what type of client do you want to reach out to you? The person who you know that you can be an assistant for them reaching the path they're supposed to be on. What type of person?
Sure. I mean, in terms of my work, as I said, I only work with people who are awake and who work for themselves. So it's really, you know, entrepreneurs. I know that's interpreted in different ways by different people, but essentially anyone who works for themselves, who is awake to the external agendas and is pro-freedom, pro-truth, and it is on that more of that inner awakening journey. You know, that is broadly who I work with. And I have a group program which is starting in June, and I do also work with people one-on-one. But it's really, you know, people who want to really reclaim their power and create the life that they want. People who want to actually make a difference in the world, doing something meaningful, and they want to be, you know, have that inner freedom to show up authentically, to create more wealth, to create more reach, to create more impact in their, you know, in their work in the world. And so that's, you know, that's who I work with, and that's who I create content for. So I, yes, I'm not on social media anymore, but I share content, video, audio, and written content with my mailing list. So that's all intended to help people, you know, with this inner journey and really reclaiming their power and authenticity.
I applaud you for that. I learned a long time ago that entrepreneurs give themselves the greatest gift of all, the potential, the possibility to self-actuate, because they get to decide how they're going to interact with the world, and then to self-actualize, they are rubbing against their worlds where they have to make changes and they have to learn about themselves, and they're not asking someone permission. They're going out and doing it.
Yeah, it's
Laura,
not
how does
easy though.
someone...
It's not easy though. This is the thing. A lot of people, I've had many conversations with people over the last couple of years who have, you know, kind of left the corporate world as a result of this scam, and they've woken up, or, you know, they've realized they don't want to work for someone else anymore, and they are embarking on this journey of, you know, being self-sufficient and working for oneself, and with an idea that it's going to be quite easy. And that journey is not easy. It's very rewarding, but it is really not easy. And what happens is it's all of those conditioned, programmed coping mechanisms, subconscious blocks, limiting beliefs. It's all of that stuff that comes up and stops them from fulfilling their true potential, because we are all, we're all so powerful if we're fully in our authenticity and we're not held back by all this stuff. And that's the sticking point for most of the people that, that I speak with who are in that, in that situation. It's like, I really want to, I want to be free. I want to like be my own boss. I want to work for myself, but they're holding themselves back. They're keeping themselves small. They've got issues with confidence. They're self-sabotaging. It's the same old stuff over and over again. And it doesn't matter who I speak with. It's the same. It's the same problems. And so, yeah, it's all of that stuff. You can do it, but don't think that it's a really easy journey, because it isn't.
That's why I shared that it's the possibility to self-actualize, to figure out your rhythm. Laura, how does someone get on your list, your mailing list, to get your information, to be able to contact you? Where do they go?
Just my website. So basically I have one link. It is my website is laurajanebolton.com. So if you go on there, you can contact me, you can join my mailing list, you can access my offerings, you can access free content, like that. Everything is through there, but don't try and find me on social media because I'm not using it.
And you have a group that is going to be launching a seminar.
No, it's a 6 month. It's a 6 month program. We've filled some of the spots already, but it's a 6 month program which starts on the 1st of June, and all the details for that are on the website as well.
Can you give us a little sneak peek of like what areas are going to be covered?
Well, really, the program is designed specifically for awake entrepreneurs, and it is to help them to experience, to really reclaim their power and experience more freedom, more wealth, and have more reach and impact. So it's for anyone who is working for themselves, or they're in that transition phase where they're creating a business for themselves. So it's for a very specific type of person. And really, as I said before, the core of my work is about authenticity. So it's about helping people to shed all of the limiting programming, all of the stuff in their subconscious that is blocking them, getting to the root of that stuff, right? You have to get to the root of the problem. And also connecting very deeply within. So helping people to find that inner connection, because most people are completely disconnected from their heart and soul. So it's focusing on that as well. And also then using the conscious mind to shift those things. So I have a very holistic approach. I address the psychological, the somatic, which is within the body, which is more of the nervous system, subconscious stuff, and then the connecting to the heart and soul. And it's through that holistic approach and doing it as a group that is very, very powerful. And the reason that I'm doing it for a group, and I'm focused more on group work now, is that the people you are surrounded by is, I think, the most powerful factor in whether you actually are able to make change happen. And when you are going through a process with a group of people who are on that similar journey, the amount of encouragement, inspiration, challenge, support that you receive from that is the differentiating factor in whether you actually implement those changes or not. And I have learned, one of the greatest things I've learned in all of my experience, both individually myself and as working as a coach for many years, is those people who do not have a support network, which is on people on a similar journey, people who are championing you, people who have that, that desire for change and to support others doing that. People who do not have a support network like that very, very rarely are able to implement sustainable change in their life, because you do become the people you spend the most time with. So if you're hanging out with people that are not inspiring you and are not supporting you and are not challenging you, you are really going to struggle. And that's why, you know, for me, the people I associate with is so important to me, and I will not spend time with anybody who is not in alignment with me and does not support me in being my fullest, most authentic self. And so that's why I'm really passionate about the group work, because it's very, very powerful to go through that process as a group.
It's been wonderful. I would encourage anyone, I'm still on a social network that Awaken people who are entrepreneurs belong to, and I hope that those of you who feel that you need something, you need the support, you need a group of people who are looking towards good. To me, that's what love is, moving towards good, finding good. I would highly recommend Laura, because Laura's been on the journey, and you want to join people on the journey so you can actually make your journey a better journey. Laura, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much, because we haven't caught up, and I'd like to catch up on another Zoom call after you've finished this course to find out where you are at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to chat with you again.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
It's laurajanebolton.com. You will see this thing probably through the entire video. It will run through the bottom, and I would recommend getting on that mailing list. Laura, you've been great.
Thank you, Peter. It's been great speaking with you.